Lieutenant Wildhaber, what is it like for people that don't hear often about the topic of gay officers working for police departments? What is it like to be a gay man working for a police department?
When I went to work, I never considered myself as a gay man going to work for a police department. I considered myself being a police officer and going to work. I didn't really let my sexuality influence the way I acted at work, how I had interactions with my employees or other coworkers. It was just never really a topic that was important enough for me to discuss at work.
Is it difficult to be out and about, working as a police officer, dealing with suspects and those sorts of things? I mean, all police officers really have to put up sort of a wall.
You do. It's a very masculine-dominated profession. I understood that going into it. I was in the military during the don't ask, don't tell era. Kind of brought that with me onto the police department in the early years of my career, and really kept it hidden. It was only in the past probably 10 years that I became more open with my sexuality at work. And it was never that I did it to extremes. It was, if I was going to talk, I was going to have dinner with my partner, or me and my partner were doing this or that. I could see some people were taken aback by it. And they're like, oh, you shouldn't talk about that kind of stuff while you're at work. But also the same person would have a picture of themselves and their wife on the desk, and that was appropriate. So it was an interesting dynamic.
Do you recall sort of the first time you felt like your sexuality was playing a part in your ability to get promoted and move up in the department?
I think the first incidence was when I got promoted to sergeant, and I was assigned to the Afton precinct as a new sergeant. I was brought into the precinct commander's office, and pretty matter-of-factly asked me, would you have a problem supervising this officer on your squad because he's gay? And that struck me as a little bizarre. I didn't know how to respond to that, and I just, I said I would have no problem supervising anyone on my squad, and their sexuality didn't influence that. That was the first time, really, other than locker room type talk. It's like I said, it's a masculine-dominated profession, but that one incident, it woke me up.
And was it because you thought that's a question that a male officer wouldn't be asked about supervising a female officer, or vice versa? Right.
I couldn't imagine a male or a female officer being asked that question about somebody they're potentially going to supervise. We have a job to do, and that's to supervise our officers, to keep our officers safe. And I don't care if they were black, white, gay, straight, lesbian. It didn't matter.
When John Saraceno allegedly told you to tone down your gayness, that has become sort of the phrase that you based your lawsuit upon, do you feel like he was being malicious in any way, or what do you think he meant by that statement?
My initial thought was I was stunned when I heard him say those words. Quickly removed myself from that situation, gave it a lot of thought after the fact, and then watching how things were playing out, I don't think he was being malicious when he said that. I profoundly believe that he believed that was something that was going to be holding me back with the command staff, and was giving me a warning. Hey, this is on the radar.
How did your there was a moment that you've talked about, and it relates to this lawsuit, when the EEOC complaint was first filed. There was a story about it, and then there was some news stories about it. How did that play a role in your mother finding out about your sexuality?
I don't want to say it's funny, but it kind of is. I had never had a discussion with my family about my sexuality. I knew when the EEOC complaint was filed and ultimately the lawsuit was filed that it was going to become public. A newspaper article ran about the lawsuit. The morning news channels covered it, and my mother had gotten up and she was making her coffee like she does every morning, and the TV was on in the background. She saw my face on the screen and immediately thought, oh my God, something happened to him last night and they haven't called to tell me. And then she said it went to a commercial break, and when it came back on, she listened to the story and she told me, yeah, it was a story about a whole lot of nothing. So that was telling me that she was accepting and still the loving mother.
Wow. So many other officers, and in fact we heard about another officer at the trial, have been victims of discrimination, but nothing has been done. They have not filed any EEOC complaint. They have certainly not filed lawsuits. Why did you take it as far as you did?
And that incident's interesting because I happen to be the one that discovered the discrimination against that young police officer in a selection process. And I talked to him about it. He was pretty upset by it. Very young in his career, so he was afraid that taking any action was going to ruin him on the department. And it was things like that I knew I had to take a stand for the younger officers coming up with the department so they wouldn't be discriminated against based on who they are. That young officer was subpoenaed for the trial, and we were going to use him as a plaintiff's witness. As the week went on, it was determined that between myself and my attorneys that we weren't going to use him because didn't really want to drag him in the middle of it, unaware of what his outness was to his family. But it was a telling example of what the culture was.
At the point in time you filed your EEOC complaint and then the lawsuit, were you far in your career at that point?
Yeah, at that point I was, let's see, in 2016, I had been there about 22 years.
And so did your longevity in your career make you feel more confident than perhaps the younger officer did when he became a victim of discrimination as well? Did you feel more comfortable then moving forward?
I don't think it was ever comfortable. I think it was necessary. And I think the fact that I had some years in and I understood how the system worked and kind of, I thought in my mind I knew how it was going to play out. I didn't know the retaliation would be like it was, but I had to go forward for the officers coming up behind me.
Okay. Weeks after you filed your EEOC complaint, you were transferred. What was that like?
That was, I guess, the first big retaliation I'd faced. That EEOC complaint was filed early April of 2016. By middle of May 2016, I was being transferred from the Afton precinct, which was close to my house, to the Jennings precinct, and put on a midnight shift in that precinct.
And how long had you served in Afton?
I was in Afton as a probationary police officer, and then I left there. I went to the Detective Bureau for 5 years, was promoted out of the Detective Bureau, and went back to Afton as a supervisor. So a good part of my career was spent in Afton.
What was one of the hardest moments for you transferring out of Afton?
That was a tough time in 2016. First was the EEOC filing. That was gut-wrenching to go down there to that federal building and file that EEOC complaint.
Why? Why was it gut-wrenching?
I love the county police department. I love the officers that work there. And it took a toll on me to challenge what seemed to be the status quo and to put myself in that position. It was pretty tough.
When you went back to the precinct and the transfer was already in motion and news had started to spread to your squad that you were leaving, what was that like?
It was tough. We had a very close squad in Afton. Blake Snyder was one of the officers who worked for me, and Blake came in that afternoon, and I could always tell when Blake was going to be upset about something because he would bite his lower lip, and he said, "So you're leaving us and going to Jennings?" And I said, "Unfortunately." That whole year was tough. Fast forward to October, Blake lost his life. I was working the midnight shift up in Jennings and couldn't get back to South County fast enough to be there for him and his family. Knowing how this process was going forward with the EEOC complaint and the lawsuit, I knew the lawsuit would be hitting right about that time of the loss of Blake, and I did everything I could to slow that process down to make sure this lawsuit wouldn't come up while his family was mourning and the department was mourning. And so we pushed that off until the early part of 2017.
What were the 3 years like leading up to the trial? The lawsuit gets filed, then there's an additional 3 years that follows. What happens to you? What's that like?
As I look back at it now, it seems like it all went so fast. In the moment, it seemed to just be dragging on. It was continuance after continuance and delay and trying to get the county to comply with discovery orders were really tough. That discovery process went on a lot longer than it needed to be. Almost 2 years to prepare this thing for a trial, and it was just the constant delays in getting us the information. Then we went through the depositions. Once the depositions started happening, the momentum seemed like it really picked up, and it was clear that we were on the crash course for a trial.
What was it like to sit there during the trial? Were there any particular moments at trial that were really challenging for you?
I feel now, looking back at it, that I was just numb for that entire 5 days. The jury selection process that first Monday was long and drawn out, and if you've never been in that process, you wouldn't understand it. It's I was exhausted at the end of the day. You start with 48 jurors, and you're trying to get it down to 12, and attorneys deciding who they're going to strike and who they really like to see on the jury. It was a process. It was a long day, and I think at the end of the day, my attorneys knew that I was feeling the effects of it, because they asked me, said, "You feeling okay?" I said, "That was a long day." Tuesday and Wednesday, those were our days to shine in that courtroom. We had our chance to tell our story, to get our witnesses up there and get out ahead of it. Thursday, I felt like I got kicked in the teeth. At the end of that day, you sit there and you listen to coworkers call you a racist, talk about being the target of a federal investigation, talk about being a subpar employee. I'm sorry, and it really messes with your mind as you're sitting there and you listen to that stuff. And at the end of the day, thank goodness for my attorneys that keeping me level-headed. We walked out, and he said, "Hey, today was their day." He said, "If we didn't walk out of here feeling like we got beat up," he said, "something went wrong." I remember getting home that Thursday night, and it was just horrible. I felt so alone, felt like I was out on an island, and it was just it was a couple hours after I got home, and the attorney called, and he said, "I hope you're sitting down, because we just got some evidence that's going to turn this thing around." So he told me what we had and how the next day was going to play out. And I remember his words that night. He said, "Get a good night's sleep, and we're going to go in and win this thing tomorrow morning. And
why is that emotional for you?
the whole thing's been emotional. I don't know. It was just it was tough that week, and I talk about it, and I feel like I'm reliving it, and I'm sitting back in that courtroom, and it was tough because that courtroom was right across from the courtroom that I sat through the week-long Blake Snyder murder trial, and to come out every day and think about that. But I always felt that there was some kind of higher being that was there looking out for me and taking care of me during that week. Otherwise, I don't know if I would have survived that.
Did you feel like you had someone sort of, like you said, a higher power? Can you explain what you mean by that? What were some of the signs that you felt like you were really doing the right thing?
There were things that happened over that week that you can't explain. The photograph that was discovered on Thursday, that a witness who was very apprehensive about testifying in this trial, she had, and it was, I know I heard the jury foreman call it the Perry Mason moment of that trial, and it really changed the tone. That's kind of stuff just doesn't happen. At least that's what other attorneys tell me. Like that was so strong. So I did. I felt like there was somebody there helping me along in this week.
Did you feel like that somebody was Blake?
I did. I had since Blake's death, I'd gotten very close with his mother and father, and we have lunch quite a bit and talk about things. Right after Blake was killed, I knew I'd be gone from that precinct for 5 to 6 months. So I tried to distance myself from that squad because that was Blake's current squad, and he had new supervisors, and I felt like I was kind of encroaching on their space, and I didn't want to do that. And it wasn't until months later when I talked to his mom that she realized that I had been Blake's supervisor from the time he got out of the academy to the almost the time he was taken from us. Yeah, I feel like Blake was there.
So we talked about that Friday, and that Perry Mason moment happens. When the verdict was announced, or maybe if you want to back up a little bit and talk about what was it like when you were sitting there waiting for the verdict to come back?
It was gut-wrenching. The day had gotten a little long, and I was going to go across the street and try to get something to eat. Your stomach's just in knots because you don't know how long the jury's going to be. You don't know what the jury's going to say. What I can say about this jury is they were very disciplined. I heard one of the councilmen say the other day that he used the term sympathetic jury, and that was so offensive to me to hear him say that, because I watched this jury over the course of the week, and what I can say about them is they were a very disciplined jury, they were a very attentive jury, and they weren't showing any emotion in that courtroom. I tried to read faces and try to get a feeling of what are they thinking about me, and they were a hard read. So there was, walking out of that courtroom that day, I had no idea when I was trying to go across the street to get some dinner, and it just seemed like an eternity. And me and the attorney had text messaged back and forth a few times about things the jury had asked about, and he texted me, and I think it was the second text, and he said the jury asked a question about Missouri's tort compensation fund and how punitive damages get split, and they also asked for a calculator. And I remember just responding back to him, okay, thanks. And I said, and I thought about it, and I said, well, surely it's got to be a good sign for us, because they're asking about things that are going to impact me in a possible settlement. But I didn't want to commit myself in thought to that. So I just kind of kept that in my back pocket. It took us like an hour later. he texted me back and said, the jury has a verdict. And how long do you get here? I said, 3 minutes. Forgot to pay my tab and ran over to the courtroom and stood there. And as the jury filed back into that room, I was staring at them. I was trying to get some read from their facial expressions, and it was very stoic. I wasn't getting any good feelings or bad feelings, and some of them were just staring at the ground. And I was like, oh no, it's just doom and gloom at this point. And yeah, stood there and waited. When the judge came back into the courtroom, he'd asked the jury if they'd elected a foreman. The foreman said they had. He identified himself as the jury foreman. And the judge asked him if they had reached a verdict. And he had. He said he had. And then I seemed to went blank after that. I really didn't hear anything as the jury started talking. And they talked about the first count of the discrimination, and I remember hearing the word million, and I kind of looked over to the defense table and saw some reaction there. I looked at some of the friends I had in the gallery, and they had a stunned look on their face. And then they started talking about count 2, the retaliation, and I remember a lot about that. I remember the $7 million punitive damage award, and I looked at my attorneys, one to the left, one to the right, and I said, what just happened? And he said, I think they gave you $17 million. And they'd asked the judge for the verdict sheets, and they got their phones out, and they're doing calculations. I already walked out in the hallway because I knew we had won, had no idea what the amount was. I called my mom and told her that the jury had returned a verdict, and the verdict was in my favor. And I remember telling her the amount was $17 million. And got back in the courtroom, got back with the attorneys, and they said, hey, we did the math wrong. It's closer to 20 million, 19 and 9 and some change. Like, wow. So that was how that played out.
You and your attorney got very emotional together that first moment that the verdict was read and the amounts started coming out.
We did. We've worked together for 3 going on 4 years on this case, and it's hard not to develop a friendship and a stronger than attorney-client relationship. I know we embraced in the courtroom. It was very emotional. Couldn't have picked 2 better guys for attorneys or friends.
Did you take some time off after the verdict?
No, that verdict came out on Friday, and I went back to work on the midnight watch the following Saturday in North County. I was ready. I wanted to go back and get back to doing my job and trying to get back to some normalcy.
So 24 hours after you're awarded nearly $20 million, you're back on midnights in Jennings.
At that point, I was in the North County precinct, and yeah, it was less than 24 hours. I was back to work, and I remember it being a busy night, and it got my mind off things.
So your attorney tells you, actually, Keith, it's closer to $20 million. What's your reaction?
I was shocked. I never thought. I thought we had a good case. I thought we had a case that was going to be winnable. I never, in my wildest dreams, would have thought the jury would return a nearly $20 million verdict. It was just a couple months prior, we'd sent an offer to settle this case for $850,000 that went unanswered, and then sent it a second time, and the second time it went unanswered. I understand there was a lot of turmoil in county government, so I'm not pointing fingers at who dropped the ball on that. but the $20 million was a significant departure from the 850 that we'd offered to settle it for.
Definitely. So you were awarded nearly $20 million. Why did you agree to settle?
It made sense for both sides to sit down at that mediation. Judge Glenn Norton really set the tone in mediation, and I knew after talking to financial advisors and tax people what I would walk away with from that $20 million with Missouri's tort victim compensation fund. They would take half those punitive damages, and we were looking at $17 million in punitive damages, so 8.5 would have got lopped off the top right away. It made sense to try to settle in mediation. It saves the taxpayers a heck of a lot of money that they're not paying into this compensation fund, and we both walk away feeling like we had a win.
What was that mediation process like? Was it contentious?
No, it wasn't contentious at all. Judge Norton set the tone for that mediation, and both sides were very professional. It was 3 sessions that we had, and we got it worked out, and we weren't in there flipping desk over or throwing chairs. It was everybody was very cordial to each other, and the final day when we reached the agreement, you could just see everybody was a little bit relieved.
There are some people that don't think you deserve this amount of money. How do you respond to that?
I don't know that I can. I wasn't out looking for this amount of money. The jury did their job, did their civic duty, and they felt that was a reasonable amount. I've heard some talk that the jury was in higher ranges, and that they're lucky it settled, or they came to $20 million. But I can't control the amount of money that the jury's going to award on a case.
Do you think you deserve this much money?
That's a hard question. It was a long 5 years. I don't know if you could put a dollar amount on the emotional aspect this has taken on me personally, but we'll make wise use of it.
Speaking of the emotional toll, have you lost friendships over this?
I did. I had some pretty close friends that, and I get it. They thought it was a toxic situation to be friends with me, and they kind of lost touch.
Did you? There's been so much that has happened since the verdict. A lot of fallout, police board changes. The chief just this past week announced his retirement within hours of the county making the settlement amount public. What are your thoughts on all the fallout, particularly Chief Belmar's retirement?
I've been happy with Dr. Page's response to this. He's making some necessary change. He replaced the 4 members of the police board that had been there a long time. It was time for a change on that board. As far as the chief's retirement, that was unexpected to me. I really thought he was going to ride this out, and I can only wish him the best in his retirement. He's had a very good career. He led us through some very difficult times. He was there leading us during Ferguson, which really changed law enforcement across the nation. And, nothing but respect for him and for his career.
How do you feel about the legal argument that the county was preparing to use in an appeal, should an appeal be filed? I mean, they basically said it's okay to discriminate against gay people in Missouri. There's no laws preventing that. So what is your reaction to them using that as their argument?
I understand their thought process behind that is they're looking at the way they were interpreting this lawsuit and the way the case law is currently on the books. I think they misinformed themselves. This case was never a sexual orientation case. This case was a case of gender stereotyping, which the Missouri Supreme Court ruled in 2019 is a form of sex discrimination. So it was never about a sexual orientation case, which that seemed like they argued in their motion for the new trial and to reduce that jury award. But it was, I think it was a misguided application of what they thought the law was.
All right, is there any other additional aspects of the fallout that you wanted to address? Anything that's happened in the months since the verdict?
I was extremely happy for the promotion, and I appreciate Chief Belmar for promoting me to lieutenant rank. Also, the creation of the diversity and inclusion unit within the police department, and I was honored to be asked if I would command that unit. It's a newly created unit for the police department, so it's building it from the ground up, and I'm going to own it, and I'm going to go to work every day and try to develop this unit and try to make the department a better place. We have diversity. There's no doubt about it. The county police has diversity. It's the inclusion aspect. Everybody has to feel like they've got a seat at the table and a voice at the table. Hazel Irby hosted an event yesterday, and it was who are you bringing to the dance? And it's not about just bringing somebody to the dance. It's asking that person to dance when they're there. And looking forward to working with Ms. Irby going forward, and I think we could do great things.
There has been some criticism, especially from the Black Police Officers Membership Organization, saying that they're upset about your appointment to this unit, to lead this unit, that they didn't have any input. How do you respond to that?
I've heard the criticism. I don't agree with it. I think my life experience sets me up perfectly for this job. You know, my supervisor is an African American. My supervisor's supervisor is an African American, and the sergeant who's working under me in the unit is an African American. It's very well represented, and I just don't feel that that criticism is appropriate.
What does this unit do? I know you're very new to it, but if you could sort of describe, what your day-to-day is like and what this unit, what do you want it to accomplish? Being
that we're newly created, we're doing a lot of listening. We're meeting with our partners in the community, Washington University, Centene, Boeing, InBev. They've had these diversity and inclusion units in place for several years. This is new to us. We're taking some of their best practices, some of the stuff they do, and trying to bring it back and find a way to incorporate it in the way the police departments run. We're taking a look at a lot of our internal department policies, whether it be the promotional process, selection process for new units, our recruiting and retention. We need to find out why officers are leaving the department and why there's such a struggle to recruit new officers. We've got a lot on our plate. And the two of us are going to try to navigate this course.
And what are you going to do with all that money?
I haven't really decided yet. I don't plan on moving. I'm happy with where I live in South County. I've got everything I need. I'm going to invest wisely. I'm going to take care of my family, and just try to continue working.
Are you going to retire?
I have no plans to.
Why not?
I've got 3 years left. I have a 26-year career, and I want to get to the point that I would have naturally retired had this lawsuit not taken place and had I not received this large sum of money. And that's saying I've got 3 years left till I'm eligible to retire. I don't know if I'll leave that. If things are going great and we're doing a lot of good things in this new unit, then I'll stick around until, God willing, until I can't do it anymore.
Are there any other points you want to make that I haven't asked about? that you think is important?
You know, it was a long week. It was a long week for me. It was a long week for the lawyers. It was a long week for the judge. But it was a really long week for that jury. You know, these are 12 citizens of St. Louis County who did their civic duty and sat through a long week. And very professional, very disciplined, and I so much appreciation to see the legal system work the way it did, and how that whole process plays out. It's newfound respect for the civil side of our justice system.
So you've gone back to work since the verdict.
I have.
How have you been received by the department, your coworkers?
We've got a very young department. These younger officers, they couldn't believe this was going on anyway. So they grew up in the Will and Grace era, and to them, working with a gay supervisor is nothing to them. 100% supportive, and I'm sure there's some in the background who are got comments, but I can't let that affect me. I've got a job to do. The chief asked me to do this job, and I'm going to do it. I go back to work every day and just try to make the department a better place.
Have you forgiven Chief Belmar?
I have. I don't hold this against any one person. It was a culture. I'd read a column in a local paper, and the columnist talked about 20th century men, and really understood that and saw where he was coming from. We're in a different generation now, and but do I forgive the chief? Absolutely.